The streets of Manila were alive with chaos, jeepneys honking, vendors shouting, and children weaving through traffic with outstretched hands. Amidst the noise, a boy named Miguel stood on a cracked sidewalk, clutching a battered guitar. Its strings were uneven, its wood worn smooth from years of use, but to Miguel it was more precious than gold. He closed his eyes, strummed gently, and let his voice rise above the noise of the city. Miguel was only 14, but life had aged him far beyond his years. His father had left when he was just a baby, and his mother worked long hours as a laundrywoman, barely earning enough to keep food on the table. It was Miguel who had become the quiet guardian of his younger sister, Lisa. He made sure she ate, even if that meant he didn't. He walked her to school, even if his own homework stayed unfinished. And every evening when the sun dipped low, Miguel sang. For coins, for kindness, for survival. His voice was hauntingly beautiful, carrying a mixture of pain and innocence. Some days, passers-by would stop, drawn in by the sound, and drop a few coins into the rusty tin can at his feet. On other days, people hurried past, too consumed by their own lives to notice the boy with the guitar. But no matter what, Miguel kept singing. Because music wasn't just his dream, it was his lifeline. One humid evening, after hours of singing with little to show for it, Miguel sat down on the curb. Lisa leaned her head against his shoulder, her small stomach growling. Miguel pulled out the few coins they had collected, not enough for rice and bread. He felt a stab of guilt, as though he had failed her. But when Lisa looked up at him with tired eyes and said, "Kuya, your song makes me happy, even if we're hungry," something in him refused to give up. That night, as they sat in their tiny one-room home with peeling paint and a flickering bulb, Miguel scrolled through his old second-hand phone. He stumbled upon a video of a boy his age performing on America's Got Talent. The stage was massive, the audience cheering, the judges smiling in awe. For a moment, Miguel allowed himself to dream. What if that could be me? What if I could sing on a stage where the whole world could hear my voice? The thought seemed impossible. He was just a poor boy from the Philippines, singing barefoot in the streets. Yet something inside him whispered that dreams were worth chasing, no matter how far. With trembling fingers, he found the AGT audition link. His heart pounded as he recorded a simple video of himself singing in their dimly lit home. Lisa clapped when he finished, saying, "They'll love you, Kuya." Miguel smiled faintly. He didn't know if the world would love him. But he knew one thing for certain, he had to try. Not for himself, but for her. The plane ride to America had been overwhelming enough, but nothing compared to the dazzling sight of the America's Got Talent stage. As Miguel stood in the wings, waiting for his turn, his hands trembled around the neck of his guitar. He had never been this far from home, never seen so many bright lights or heard so many people clapping and laughing in one room. For a moment, he felt like a small shadow about to be swallowed by the grandeur of it all. Contestant number 4753, "You're next," a stagehand whispered, ushering him forward. Miguel's heart pounded so hard it felt like the sound might echo through the microphone. He glanced down at his clothes. A plain button-up shirt, slightly faded, and jeans with frayed edges. Nothing glamorous. He thought of the contestants backstage with sparkling outfits and perfect smiles. Do I even belong here, he wondered. But then he remembered his sister's words before he left. Kuya, sing like you're singing just for me. That thought steadied him. The heavy curtains parted, and suddenly, Miguel was standing under blinding spotlights. The audience stretched endlessly before him, thousands of faces blurred into a sea of anticipation. The judges' table glowed at the center, where Simon Cowell, Sofia Vergara, Heidi Klum and Howie Mandel waited, their eyes fixed on him. Simon leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. "Hello. What's your name?" Miguel swallowed hard, his accent soft but clear. "My name is Miguel. I'm from the Philippines. And why are you here today?" Simon asked, his voice sharp but curious. Miguel took a shaky breath. I want to give my sister a better life. I sing for her." The audience went still. The sincerity in his words carried more weight than any long speech. Simon nodded slowly. "All right, Miguel. We'd love to hear you." Miguel shifted his guitar, strummed the first trembling chord, and then, the moment his voice rose into the microphone, everything changed. The nervous boy vanished. What emerged was a voice so pure, so heartbreakingly beautiful. that the entire theater seemed to hold its breath. His song wasn't just melody. It was a story. Every note carried the hunger he had felt. Every lyric carried the weight of nights spent watching over his sister. Every rise and fall echoed with hope that life could be better. His voice filled the room with both fragility and strength, leaving goosebumps on the arms of strangers, who moments before didn't even know his name. Parents in the audience gripped their children's hands tighter. Contestants waiting backstage leaned closer to the monitors. Judges exchanged glances, astonished at the depth pouring from a boy so young. By the time Miguel reached the chorus, the applause had already begun. People stood to their feet, unable to wait until the end. The shy boy from Manila had managed to quiet the loudest stage in the world. Not through spectacle, but through truth. And when his final note lingered in the air, the silence before the explosion of cheers was more powerful than the noise itself. Miguel looked up, breathless, unsure of what would come next. But in the judge's eyes, something had already shifted. As Miguel's final note faded into the air, the theater fell into a silence so profound it was almost sacred. The sound of his voice still hung in the space between the lights and the rafters, as if no one dared to break its spell. For one suspended moment, time stood still. Then came the sound, first a gasp, then a wave of applause crashing like thunder. Audience members rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, whistling, some even shouting Miguel's name as though they had known him all along. Strangers embraced each other, wiping tears from their eyes, shaken by the rawness of what they had just witnessed. Backstage. Crew members stopped in their tracks to listen. Even the other contestants waiting nervously for their turn were stunned, many whispering, "Who is this kid?" His song had slipped past the barriers of language and circumstance, striking straight at the heart. But the most surprising reaction of all was from Simon Cowell. The man known worldwide for his sharp tongue and ruthless honesty leaned back in his chair, his usually steely eyes glistening. At first, he tried to hide it, blinking rapidly, pressing his lips into a thin line. But there was no use. The emotion was too strong. A single tear rolled down his cheek, catching the stage lights as it fell. "Simon, Simon," was crying. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the rare moment. The audience gasped and cheered louder, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just about a boy singing beautifully. It was about a truth so deep that even one of the toughest men in the industry couldn't hold back his tears. Miguel, still clutching his guitar, didn't notice at first. He stood frozen, overwhelmed by the roar of the crowd. His chest rose and fell rapidly as if he'd just run a marathon. Then, when he finally looked toward the judge's table, his eyes widened. He saw Simon wipe his face, shaking his head in disbelief. The boy's heart tightened. He had grown up watching AT clips on YouTube, where Simon was often the scariest part of the audition. Now, the same man who had broken so many performers' dreams was crying because of his song. Simon leaned forward, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Miguel," he began, pausing to steady himself, "I don't cry easily. But what you just did, it wasn't just singing. It was honesty, it was love. And it reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." The audience erupted again, chanting Miguel's name. Miguel's knees almost gave way. For years he had wondered if his voice mattered, if anyone beyond the noisy streets of Manila would ever truly hear him. And now, here he was, bringing one of the hardest men to tears. Touching thousands of hearts in the room, and millions more watching from afar. For Miguel, this wasn't just applause. This was validation. Proof that the struggles, the hunger, the nights of doubt, all of it had meaning. His voice had traveled from the cracked sidewalks of his homeland to the grandest stage in the world, and it had made the unshakable Simon Cowell cry. And that moment would change everything. The applause still shook the theater when Simon leaned back, his eyes fixed on Miguel. The other judges were smiling, their faces glowing with admiration. Sophia whispered, "That was magical." Heidi pressed a hand over her heart. Howie nodded with a look of genuine respect. But everyone knew the moment belonged to Simon. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Miguel," he said slowly, "I've been doing this for a long time. I've heard thousands of singers from every corner of the world. But what you just did," his voice broke, forcing him to pause. He glanced down, exhaled sharply, then looked back up. What you just did reminded me why this show exists. It reminded me that talent, real talent, isn't about perfection, it's about truth. And you are the truth." The crowd roared, stamping their feet, chanting Miguel's name. Miguel, trembling under the lights, could barely process the words. His heart pounded in his ears. He wanted to believe this was real, but it felt like a dream, one he feared waking up from. Then Simon stood. Slowly. Deliberately. The other judges turned toward him, realizing what was about to happen. The audience caught on too, and their cheers grew louder, like a wave slumming before it crashes. Simon reached his hand forward, and slammed it down on the golden buzzer. The theater exploded. A blinding shower of gold confetti rained down from above, filling the stage, swirling around Miguel like a golden storm. The audience screamed, some jumping up and down, others recording the moment on their phones. The judges stood and clapped, their smiles as lights that illuminated the stage. Miguel froze, his hands covering his mouth. His knees buckled, and he sank to the floor, clutching his guitar as tears streamed down his face. He wasn't crying out of shock, or even for himself. He was crying because in that moment, he saw his sister's face. He imagined her sitting in their little home, watching the confetti fall around him, realizing that all the nights they had gone hungry, all the times he had sung in the streets, had led to this. Backstage, producers rushed to bring Lisa forward. She came running, her tiny arms flinging around her brother's neck as she squealed, "Koya! You did it! You did it!" The sight of the siblings embracing amidst the golden rain, sent the audience into another frenzy of applause. Simon wiped his face again, this time with a smile tugging at his lips. "This is why I love this job," he said quietly, though the microphone carried his words to millions. "Because sometimes, someone walks in from the other side of the world, and reminds us all what humanity really sounds like." Miguel held his sister tightly, overwhelmed, unable to speak. For the first time in his life, the boy who sang on the streets of Manila felt seen, not as a beggar, not as a poor boy with a cracked guitar, but as an artist, a brother, and a dreamer who had just struck gold. And as the confetti continued to fall, so too did the barriers that had once held him back. The stage lights dimmed, the confetti settled, and Miguel was led backstage, still clutching his guitar with trembling hands. His sister Lisa clung to him, refusing to let go. For a long time, he simply held her, feeling her small heartbeat against his chest. He had dreamed of this moment. Of giving her more than hunger, more than hardship, but living it felt unreal. Backstage crew members, producers, and even fellow contestants swarmed around them, offering hugs, high fives, and words of encouragement. Miguel was overwhelmed by kindness from strangers. In Manila, he was often overlooked, invisible in the bustle of the streets. Here, people were looking at him as though he mattered, as though his voice had carved a place for him in the world. Lisa tugged at his sleeve, her eyes wide with wonder. "Kuya, does this mean we don't have to sing on the streets anymore?" Miguel knelt down to her level, tears filling his eyes again. "It means, Lisa, that things can change. That maybe one day, you'll never have to worry about food or school or anything." His voice cracked, but he managed a shaky smile. "We did this together." Meanwhile, out on the stage, Simon Cowell was still shaken. In interviews later that night, he admitted something rare. "It's not often I get emotional, but that boy, he reminded me of the power of music. It wasn't about the notes or the performance. It was about love, the kind of love that makes you fight for someone else. And that's what the world needs to hear." A clip of Miguel's audition spread like wildfire across social media. Within hours, millions of people around the globe were watching the barefoot boy from Manila sing his heart out. Hashtags trended. Comments poured in. People from every corner of the world shared how his performance touched them. How it reminded them of their own struggles, their own families, their own reasons to keep going. But for Miguel, none of that compared to the quiet moment in the hotel room that night. Sitting by the window with Lisa asleep beside him, he stared out at the glowing skyline of Los Angeles. He strummed his guitar softly, whispering a prayer of gratitude. He thought of his mother back home, working late nights to keep their family afloat. He thought of the times he had gone hungry so Lisa could eat, the times he had sung on empty streets for only a few coins. And now, here he was, on the brink of something greater, not for fame but for hope. For the first time in his life, Miguel allowed himself to dream bigger. Not just of surviving, but of thriving. Of sending Lisa to school. Of building a home where she would never feel cold or hungry again. Of using his voice to inspire others who felt small and forgotten, just as he once had. As dawn began to break, Miguel whispered. "This is only the beginning." He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Love had carried him this far, and love would carry him further still. And somewhere in the quiet, the faint echoes of the golden buzzer still shimmered in his heart, reminding him that sometimes, even the poorest voices can create the richest songs.